Welcome to Prairie Heart Stories, and thank you for joining me today. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. The mail-order bride never came, but the cowboy changed his life.
The ring sat in a tin that had once held tobacco, and Luke turned it over twice in the gray light before he set it down. Plain gold, no stone. He'd asked the smith in Red Fork for plain, because a working woman's hands had no use for stones, and he'd believed, 3 weeks back, that he knew a thing or two about the woman whose hands they'd be. He knew her name. He knew she could read and write a fair hand because the letters had come once a month since spring, smelling faint of nothing, full of weather and her aunt's poor health, and a line at the bottom. Each time that he had read more often than a grown man ought to admit. The last letter lay open on the table beside the tin. He did not need to read it again. He read it again. She was sorry. Her aunt had taken a turn, and a man back east, with a brick house and a settled trade, had spoken for her, and she hoped Luke would understand that a woman alone must think of more than her own wishes. She wished him every happiness. She did not send back the photograph he mind-mailed, and he found he minded that, a little, in a place he didn't look at often. The stage had come in empty Tuesday. He'd stood at the road with his hat in his hand like a fool, and watched the dust settle, and told himself the next one, Wednesday, it came empty too. By the time her letter caught up to him on Thursday's mail, he'd already known. A man knows. He just keeps standing at the road a while after, because standing is easier than turning around and walking back to the things he bought. And he had bought things. He looked at them now in the thin dawn coming through the window. He'd reglazed for her the cook stove, new from the freight, its nickels still bright, not a meal cooked on it yet. The quilt folded over the foot of the bed, pieced by Naomi down the creek for a fee, because he'd wanted it ready. Wanted her to walk in and find a home and not a bachelor's cold camp. The lumber stacked clean against the north wall, fresh sawn pine he'd meant to raise into a second room. Because he'd thought, fool that he was, there might one day be need of a second room. He'd built a life and set it out on the table like a supper for a guest who wasn't coming. Luke stood a while. Then he carried it all out to the wagon, piece by piece, the bright unburnt stove, the folded quilt, the stacked pine, the household goods he'd laid by, and roped it down, and led the milk cow out to trail behind, the ring he put in his coat. He did not let himself name, even now, what the load had been bought for. That was nobody's trade but his. By the time the sun cleared the mesa, the cabin stood open behind him, with the lamp still burning, forgotten, in the empty window. He'd meant to snuff it. He didn't go back. Let it burn itself out. Let the place find out for itself what an empty house felt like. He was through teaching it. He stopped in Red Fork on his way out and sold the wedding things off the wagon bed to whoever had the coin. The new cook stove went to the boarding house woman. A rancher's wife took the hand-pieced quilt for her daughter, turning it over and not asking why a bachelor had a wedding quilt to sell, for which he was grateful. He let each piece go for less than it had cost him and never once haggled. A man doesn't haggle over a thing he only wants gone. What wouldn't sell stayed on the wagon. The fresh sawn pine nobody in town had any use for. The cow, the harness, and the ring stayed in his coat. He told himself he'd sell that down the road. He knew he was lying. He climbed up, took the lines, and sat a moment looking down the road south. It ran out flat and red between the Pinon hills toward country. He didn't know and didn't care to, which suited him fine. A man who expected nothing of a road couldn't be left standing at it. "Get up," he said, and the cow lowed once behind the wagon, and Red Fork slid away. 2 days south, the country dried out and went to red rock and silver green brush, and Luke had stopped expecting to meet anybody when he heard the voices. They came up out of a dry wash ahead, where the road dipped between two clay banks. A man's voice, easy and pleased with itself. Then, a woman's, low and flat, the way a body talks when they've decided that showing fear will cost them more than the thing they're afraid of. He brought the wagon up slow to the lip of the wash and looked down. A canvas-topped wagon stood crooked in the wash bottom, one rear wheel sunk and canted, a felloe split clean through. 2 riders had drawn up alongside it. One sat his horse with a rifle laid across the saddlebow, not pointed at anything, which was its own kind of pointing. The other had swung down and was lifting a fitted wooden chest out of the wagon bed. The kind of chest with brass corners, and a doctor's care taken in the building of it. The woman stood at the tailboard with her hands at her sides. Brown traveling dress gone pale at the seams, a flat-crowned hat, dark hair pinned up under it. She wasn't young and she wasn't old. She watched the man take her chest the way you'd watch someone take a tooth out of your head, holding still because moving made it worse. "There's laudanum in there," she said. "Quinine. Carbolic. It's no good to you, and there are children up the road it's the whole world to. Leave it." "Toll's toll, ma'am." The mounted one shifted his rifle. "Mr. Doyle holds this road. You want to use it, you pay to use it. Chest looks about right." Luke sat where he was a moment. It was not his road, and not his chest, and not his fight, and he had ridden 2 days to be exactly the kind of man who passed on by. He thought about that. Then he clucked to the team and started the wagon down the bank, the wheels grinding loud on the loose rock so that all 3 of them looked up at once. He didn't hurry. He let them watch him come. He drew rein a dozen feet off, easy, both hands in plain sight on the lines, and he looked at the man holding the chest, and then at the man with the rifle, and then he looked at nothing in particular off down the wash, the way a man looks who has all day and no special opinion about how it goes. "Help you," the rifleman said. "Nope." Luke let the silence sit, saw the wagon, figured a wheel. Figured wrong. "Move along." "I might." Luke set the brake. The ratchet clicked, loud in the heat. He climbed down without hurry and stood by his own front wheel with his hand resting on the iron tire. And he looked at the 2 of them and let them do the arithmetic. 2 of them? Sure. But the one was off his horse with both arms full of a heavy chest, and the other had a rifle laid wrong for a man on the ground, and there was no telling. From the look of this dusty stranger, whether he was a fool or whether he was the kind of trouble that left bodies in washes, and the not telling was the whole of it. Luke had learned that in harder country than this, you didn't need to be dangerous, you needed them to not know you weren't. "Long way to haul a tooth-puller's box," Luke said, "for what it'll bring." The man with the rifle worked his jaw. He looked at his partner, and his partner numbered the hark, and his partner looked at the chest in his arms like it had gotten heavier, and some figuring passed between them that didn't need words. Doyle, whoever Doyle was, didn't pay them to get shot over a wash. "Put it back, Cole," the rifleman said. Cole set the chest in the wagon bed, not gentle. He climbed up sour. The 2 of them backed their horses, and the rifleman pointed the gun's muzzle at the sky in a way that was meant to be remembered, and said, "You'll wish you'd kept riding, mister." And then they were 2 shapes going off up the far bank in their own dust. The woman let her breath out slow. She put one hand flat on the tailboard, like the wagon might walk off too. "You all right?" Luke asked. "I'm vexed." She looked at him, Frank, taking his measure the same way he'd taken theirs. "Which is better than robbed. Clara Hale." She didn't offer her hand. She was already turning to the broken wheel. "I'd shake, but I'd rather you looked at that fellow and told me how dead it is." He crouched at the wheel. "Dead. I got a spare, in my load near enough the size, take the better part of an hour." "I have the better part of an hour." "I don't have 2. She crouched beside him, quick and economical in the way she folded down, a working person's body, under the worn dress. "There's a slow fever in a place called Hollow Springs, half a day on." I'm the only doctor it's likely to see. Those two work for the man who's been bleeding it dry, and he holds the only clean spring for 30 miles, which is the kind of thing that'll keep a doctor up at night. She glanced at his loaded wagon, the cow on its lead, the household goods. You're moving? I'm moving. To where? He had no answer that wasn't a lie, so he gave her none and went to get the spare wheel. She watched him a moment, then nodded once, like a thing was settled that he hadn't known was being decided. I can pay a little, not much. I'd take it kindly if you saw me as far as the springs. The road's gotten to be the sort a woman alone shouldn't ride. And I've a chest. Those two will come back for once they've got their nerve and a third man. Luke fit the wheel onto the hub and reached for the linchpin. 2 days, he'd told himself, riding out of Red Fort. 2 days and he'd be somewhere that wasn't the place that had taught him what an empty house felt like. He hadn't decided yet where the somewhere was. It still wasn't decided. He told himself that. I'll see you that far, he said. They came up out of the wash by late afternoon, his wagon ahead and hers behind. And where the road climbed a long red rise, the country opened below them into a shallow basin with a thread of green down its middle and a scatter of low houses along the green. Smoke from a few chimneys. A church no bigger than a corn crib with a bell in a frame beside it. And on the houses, door after door, a knot of yellow rag tied to the post, hanging dead still in the windless heat. Beside him, Clara had gone very quiet. That's more doors than there were 3 weeks. They rode in past the yellow rags with the light going long and amber across the basin, and nobody came out to meet them but a single old woman. And she came fast. She was small and bent and quick, gray hair scraped back hard, sleeves shoved to the elbow on forearms corded like a man's. She had a rag of her own knotted at her throat against the smell, and she pulled it down when she saw the doctor's wagon and put a hand over her mouth instead. And for a second her hard face did something it plainly wasn't used to doing. "You came," she said. "I rode 3 weeks past, and I'd about stopped looking for anybody to come. I came as quick as the road let me." Clara was already down off her seat, already reaching for the chest. "How many?" "9 down now, 2 I'd not give you much hope on." The Coombs boy worst of all. The old woman's eyes cut to Luke and the loaded wagon and the cow, sizing, dismissing, coming back to Clara. "Naomi Pike. I do what doctoring there is to do here. Which is to say I've buried more than I've saved this month, and I'm sick to my soul of it." "Who's he?" "He's the reason I've still got my medicines," Clara said. "Where's the worst one?" Naomi led them down the single dirt lane between the houses, and Luke, having no clear reason to, got down and followed. Because the alternative was sitting alone in a wagon in a dying town's dusk, and even a man done with people would rather not do that. The Coombs place was a one-room jacal of mud and pole, with a hide at the window. Inside it was close and hot and smelled of sickness and tallow smoke. A man knelt by a low bed, big through the shoulders. A sheepman by the grease and lanolin worked into him, and he did not look up when they came in. On the bed a boy lay too still, maybe 8 years old, his face the color of old paper and slicked with sweat, his lips cracked. "Asa," Naomi said. "The doctor's here." The man looked up then, and Luke saw a thing in his face he knew from the inside, from his own mirror, 3 days back at the empty road. A man holding still because moving made it worse. "Ellie won't drink," Asa said. "I get it to his lips and it runs out the side. Since noon he won't drink." Clara was on her knees at the bedside, 2 fingers at the boy's throat, the back of her hand to his cheek, fast and sure, no wasted motion. "He has to take water or he's lost, and not the well water. Has he been drinking the well water?" "It's the water we got. Boil me water. Now, and let it cool to where I can bear my finger in it." She glanced over her shoulder, and her eyes found Luke standing useless in the doorway. "You. Hold him up. I need him sitting, and I need both my hands." Luke had not come in to be of use. But there was the boy, and there was no one else, and the doctor was not asking. He crossed the dirt floor and got an arm behind the small, hot shoulders and lifted. And the boy weighed nothing, weighed like a carpet bag with a mother's Bible in it, weighed like everything that had no business being so light. Clara wetted a cloth and pressed it to the cracked lips, patient, drop by drop, and after a long while the boy's throat moved, once, swallowing, and Asa Coombs made a sound and put his face down on the edge of the bed. It went on like that into the dark. Luke held the boy when he was needed to, and fetched when he was told to fetch, and stood out of the way the rest of the time. Watching the doctor work down the lane house by house, lamp to lamp. He had thought a doctor would be grand somehow. This one knelt in dirt and emptied slop pails and washed her hands raw between every house from a bottle of stinking carbolic, and said the same plain things over and over to frightened people, and did not once let them see her tired. Near midnight he carried his bedroll out by the wagon, meaning to sleep and ride at first light. He'd done what a passing man does. More. He could go in the morning with a clear account. He lay on his back and looked at the stars, which were thick and close down here away from any town's light, and listened to the basin. A dog somewhere. The creek thin over stones. And from down the lane, through the warm dark, a child crying, not the Coombs boy, some other house, some other mother's child. A thin used-up crying that went on and on because there was no one with strength left to come. Luke lay and listened to it. Then he got up and rolled his blankets and put them back in the wagon. He didn't examine why. He'd learned not to examine some things. You turned them over too much in the light, and they crumbled, and you were left with nothing in your hand. He just knew that a man could not lie 10 feet off and listen to that, and call himself, in the morning, a decent person who'd happened to be passing. He found Naomi's place by the lamp still burning. She was at her own pump in the yard, working the handle, getting nothing but a dry groan of leather. "Packing's gone," she said, not turning. "Has been a week. I've been hauling from the creek in a bucket like my grandmother." "Let me see it." She stood back and let him. He worked the handle. Times. He worked the handle, felt the slack where there should be suck, and in the lamplight he took the cap off the head and found the leather sucker cracked through. "I can cut you a new one out of that," he said, nodding at the harness boot on his wagon, the spare harness he'd hauled out with him. "Take me till sunup." Naomi Pike looked at him a long moment in the lamplight. This stranger crouched over her broken pump in the middle of the night, with a wagon load of a life he was running from. "You was leaving," she said. "I was." She didn't argue it. She set the lamp down on the well curb, where he could see to work, and she said, "Coffee, then," and went inside, and Luke cut leather in the lamplight until the sky grayed. And by the time the sun came up over the mesa, he had Naomi's pump, pulling sweet and steady, and had said nothing more about leaving, and nobody had asked him to. It was full morning, the pump fixed, and the cow milked, and a line of women already come quiet to Naomi's yard with their buckets. When Clara came up the lane gray-faced from a night with no sleep in it, she'd been down at the settlement's well. She had a tin cup in her hand, well water in it, and she held it up to the light and turned it. And then she did a thing that stopped the women cold. She tipped it and let a few drops fall on her wrist and touched her tongue to it, and her face shut like a door. "It's the water," she said. "All of it. It's not coming house to house off dirty hands, or not only. It's in the well. Something's gotten down into the well, and everyone who drinks it sickens." She set the cup down very carefully on the curb, as if it might go off. "We have to get them clean water. Today, all of them, or by next week I'll be burying this town instead of doctoring it." Naomi's face had gone gray as Clara's. There's no clean water in 30 miles, but the deep spring up the draw. Then we use the spring. We can't use the spring." It was Reuben Tate, the storekeeper. Come up the lane, wiping his hands on his apron, a soft, worried man gone hollow at the cheeks. Doyle holds the spring, filed on it. Fenced the spring house and put men on it, and there's a toll on every barrel, Daunt Yerbury, and the toll's gone up every month till there's not a soul left here can pay it. That's the whole of why we're drinking out of a poisoned well, Doctor. The good water's right up that draw, he pointed. Up the green thread of the draw, 1/2 mile, where a stand of cottonwoods marked the deep spring. Luke could see the pale shape of a stone spring house and a rail fence around it, and the small, dark figure of a man sitting a horse in the shade with a rifle across his saddle, watching the dying. There was no clever answer to the spring, not that morning, so they did the dumb, hard thing instead, which Luke had always trusted more than clever anyway. Clara set the rule and didn't bend on it, not one drop drunk that hadn't first been boiled. So they boiled. Every kettle and pot in Hollow Springs went over a fire, and the creek water came up brown, and they boiled it brown, and let it settle and poured it off the silt and boiled it again. And it tasted of wood smoke and ash, and it didn't kill anybody, which Clara said was the only quality water needed to have just then. Luke took the well. It made sense for him to take it. He was strong and he was leaving, or had been. So, if the thing was foul, it was better the leaving man went down into it than a man with children. He rigged a windlass over the well mouth from a wagon axle and a length of his own harness rope, and Reuben lowered him down into the cool stink of it on a loop, and at the bottom, 12 feet down in the dark with the daylight a coin overhead, Luke found what had killed the town. A sheep, or what the water had left of a sheep, wedged down in the cribbing where the spring fed in, weeks dead. Somebody's stray fallen in and drowned, and never missed in a place too sick to count its stock. He tied it off, and they hauled it up and buried it far off and downwind, and then Luke went back down with lime and lye and a brush and scrubbed the cribbing by feel in the dark. And they baled the well dry and let the clean spring seep fill it slow and clear. And Clara would not let a soul drink from it for 3 days, while it ran clear, boiled even then, just to be sure. It was the kind of work that didn't show. Nobody got well that day, or the next. 2 more took to their beds. But the dying slowed, and then it stopped, and on the 4th morning, no new house tied a yellow rag. And Naomi Pike stood in her yard and looked down the lane at no new rags and had to turn her back on Luke a minute and busy herself with a bucket. The boy Eli held on. That was the thing Luke found himself measuring his days by, without deciding to. Mornings he'd carry clean water down to the Coombs place, first thing, and stand in the doorway. And if the boy's eyes were open, he counted it a good day, and if they weren't, he carried the next bucket a little faster. Clara taught him the nursing of it in the evenings because there were 9 sick and 1 doctor and an old woman whose hands had given out, and that left Luke. She showed him the cool cloths 100 times, wrung not dripping, laid along the neck and the wrists and the soles of the feet where it did the most good. She showed him to spoon broth between the teeth. A man wouldn't open, slow, a little at a time, waiting for the swallow. She showed him to keep the sick apart from the well. Their slops and their cloths kept downstream and burned, his own hands scrubbed with that stinking carbolic till they cracked. "You've a steady hand for it," she said one evening, watching him hold a spoon to old Mrs. Tate's lips. Most men go clumsy at a sickbed, like they're afraid the dying's catching. "Held my mother," Luke said, "long sickness. I was the only one home by the end of it." It was more than he'd said about himself since the wash. He didn't know why he'd said it. The lamplight, maybe. A thing about a low lamp and a sick room that loosened a man's tongue when daylight kept it tied. Clara didn't say she was sorry, which he was grateful for. She reached across instead and turned his wrist a little. The spoon in his hand, her own hand over his, showing him the angle that wouldn't spill. And her hands were cracked the same as his now from the same carbolic. And for a moment they were two pairs of ruined hands, holding one spoon between them in the lamplight, and neither one of them pulled back quick. "There," she said. "Like that." "Like that," he said. She took her hand back then, but not fast, and went on to the next bed. And Luke sat a while with the spoon and the old woman and a feeling he had told himself 2 days south of Red Fork he was done feeling. They ate late, those nights, after the rounds, at Naomi's table by a coal oil lamp turned low to save the kerosene. Beans and cornbread, mostly. Coffee in tin cups that had gone thin at the rims from years of mouths. It was the plainest food Luke had eaten in years, and he could not have told you when last a meal had tasted of so much. They were tired past politeness, all three of them, and the talk that came at that table came out true the way talk does when people are too worn down to dress it up. It was at that table the fifth night that Clara told him the smallest piece of why she rode. "People ask me why a woman does this," she said, not to him exactly, turning her cup. "Why I don't take a settled town that wants a doctor and a clean office and a fee a body can live on. There's 3 towns offered," she drank. "I had a brother, younger. We were children in a river town, and the fever came through the way it does, off the water, same as here, and there was no doctor would cross to our side of the river for folks that couldn't pay. And I sat with him at the end, and there was not one single thing I knew how to do." She set the cup down. "So I learned how, and now I go to the side of the river the settled doctors won't cross to. That's all it is. It's not noble. It's just the only thing I could do with it that didn't sit in me like a stone." Luke turned that over. "What I'm running from," he said slowly, "and what you're running to, might be the same kind of thing." Clara looked at him across the lamp. "What are you running from, Luke Sands?" He opened his mouth to give her the short of it, the kind a man could say, without it costing him. But the lamp was low, and Naomi had gone to bed, and the night was wide and quiet outside, and what came out instead was the whole of it. The letters smelling of nothing. The plain gold ring. The stage that came in empty Tuesday, and again Wednesday, and a man standing at the road with his hat in his hand. The stove never cooked on. The lumber for a second room. The lamp he'd left burning in an empty window because he hadn't the heart to go back in and snuff it. When he finished, she didn't say she was sorry either, which he liked. And she didn't tell him the woman was a fool, which he liked more, because a man could hear that as easy comfort and know it for a lie. "She did you a hard turn," Clara said. "But I'll tell you a thing I've learned on this road." She nodded out at the dark, the sick houses, the basin. "There's worse fates than not getting the life you went and ordered out of a catalog. Now and again, the life you didn't order is the one that turns out to be yours." Luke didn't answer that. He didn't trust himself to. He looked at her, across the low flame, the worn dress, the cracked hands, the dark hair come loose from its pins after a long day. And he thought a thing he had no right to think about a woman who'd promised him nothing, who'd promised him, and was bound for the next town the day this one stood up. It was into that quiet that the dogs started up, and then they heard the horses, 4 of them by the sound, coming down the lane unhurried in the dark iron shoes on the hard-packed dirt. Luke was up and out the door with the lamp behind him before Clara had her feet under her. 3 riders, and a 4th out front on a tall gray. The front man sat easy, a good coat on him, a good hat. The only soft hands for 30 miles. He smiled down at Luke in the spill of lamplight and touched the brim like a neighbor come calling. Evening. His voice was warm as the night. "Heard there's a doctor come to my little town. And a stranger been pulling dead sheep out of wells and telling folks they don't have to pay for water." He looked past Luke to where Clara stood in the doorway, and his smile didn't change. And somehow that was the worst of it. "Vint Doyle, I hold the deep spring up the draw, filed and legal. You can ride to Alder Gap and read it in the book yourself. And I'm a reasonable man." He sparred. He let his gaze drift to the corral where Luke's good bay stood pale in the dark. "But a reasonable man likes a little surety that folks mean to settle up. That your horse, friend? Fine animal. I'll just hold him against what's owing. Cole." The man named Cole walked his horse to the corral and dropped the bars and led the bay out by the headstall, and Luke stood in the lamplight with his hands open at his sides and let him do it. Because there were 4 of them, and 1 church bell, and 9 sick people behind him, and a horse was a horse. "There now," Doyle said pleasantly, gathering his reins. "I do like things friendly. You boil all the creek water you want, doctor. But that fever's in the ground here. Everybody knows it. And the only water that'll save these people is up my draw, and my draw's got a price." He turned the gray. "Sunday'd be a fine day to settle accounts. Sleep on it." They went off up the lane the way they'd come, and took Luke's bay with them, and from the dark down the lane. By the end of that week, the carbolic was down to 1 inch in the bottle, and the quinine to 12 grains, and the clean cloth was rags of rags. And Clara stood over her open chest one morning and did the arithmetic out loud the way she did everything. Plain, so nobody could pretend they hadn't heard it. "There's a freight of supplies I sent for sitting at Alder Gap this past month," she said. "Carbolic, laudanum, quinine, lint. The lot. It's paid for. It's stuck at Alder because the freighters won't run Doyle's road, and Doyle won't pass it without a cut nobody'll pay." She closed the chest. "Without it, I can hold what we've got and lose the next ones who go down. With it, I can save them." "How far's Alder?" Luke said. "A day up, a day back, with a wagon. The road runs hard by the spring and right under Doyle's nose the whole way." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you. You've given more than a passing man owes 10 times over, and that's your horse they took. You can be quit of this clean and no man say a word." Luke was already looking at Naomi's mule team in the corral. "Town got a wagon?" "Reuben's freight wagon. Wants a wheel, but it'll roll. Then I'll need it by noon." He said it the way you'd say you'd need your coffee, and went to grease the wheel. And that was the whole of the discussing they did about it. Somewhere on the road south out of Red Fork, he had stopped being able to lie to himself about the 2 days. And he found he didn't much miss the lie. He took the mules and Reuben's wagon and went up the hard road, past the draw at first light, and Doyle's man in the springhouse shade watched him go by and didn't trouble him. An empty wagon going up was nothing to Doyle. It was the full one coming back he'd want a piece of. Luke marked the man, marked the gate, marked the way the fence ran, and rode on. He made Alder Gap by dark, a raw little railhead of a place, a water tank and a depot and a store, and not much else. He slept under the wagon and was at the freight office when it opened, and there it all was, Clara's crates stenciled with her name, waiting on a man with the nerve to haul them. The clerk was glad to be shut of them. It was the storekeeper at Alder who told Luke the other thing, the thing worth more than the freight. "Doyle's spring claim?" The man laughed, short and ugly. "Mr. Vint Doyle filed on that spring 2 years back, and there's not a judge in the territory to uphold it if anybody with money to lose ever took him to law. That draw and that water sit on a school section, government land, set aside, can't be claimed nor sold by any man. Doyle filed a paper at the county office that looks fine if you don't read it close, and he charges water off it like a king. And them poor folks at the springs are too sick and too broke to send a man to Alder to read the real book." He leaned on his counter. "The land office in this very town's got the true survey. Doyle's filing's worth no more than the ink it took. He just bets nobody'll ever come check. Luke had the clerk make him a fair copy of the survey, witnessed and stamped, and he folded it inside his shirt next to his skin. And he went and found the marshal. Marshal Hollis was old and slow-moving, and had a way of letting silence do half his talking, and Luke liked him at once. He listened to the whole of it without a word, looking at the witness survey, looking at Luke. Then he said, "Doyle's no killer. He's a bleeder. Bleeders fold when the bleeding's made to cost. I'll come. I've a hanging court matter 2 days out. But I'll come straight after, and I'll bring the land office record sealed. You hold your folks together, and you keep it bloodless, you hear me, son? A dead man makes a martyr, and a court case, and 10 more years of grief. A man caught in a lie just slinks off. Keep it bloodless." "Sundays, when he means to squeeze them," Luke said. "Then I'll be there Sunday or near it. Keep your people off their triggers and on their feet." The old man almost smiled. "Standing's harder than shooting. It's also better." Luke loaded out before noon. He'd have made the Springs by dark, freight and all, but the sky had other business. It had been building all morning, the heat going thick and yellow, the air gone still as held breath, and somewhere past the midpoint of the road, the monsoon broke the way it breaks in that country. Not a rain so much as a sky emptying itself all at once. He couldn't see the mule's ears. The road went to soup, and then the road went to creek, and Luke knew enough of dry country to know the real danger wasn't the sky, it was the ground. Every bare draw for miles funneling its water down into the washes, and the road crossed a wash. He felt it before he saw it. A shudder come up through the wheels, a sound under the rain like a freight train where no train ran. He cleared the washbank, and there it was below him, the dry crossing already gone, a churning brown wall of water shoving cottonwood trunks along like kindling, rising as he watched. He could have stopped on the high bank and waited it out, and lost a day and maybe a town. He didn't stop. He took the team down the near bank into the slacker water at the very edge, fast before the main of it hit the crossing. And for a few seconds the mules swam and the wagon floated and slewed, and the brown water came up over the boards and reached for the crates. And Luke was off the seat and onto the back of the near mule with his knife out, cutting the floundering lead horse free before its panic drowned them all. And he hauled on the headstalls and cursed the mules up the far clay bank by main strength and terror, the wagon coming up, streaming and tilting, and then, with a great sucking lurch, up onto solid ground, the floodwaters snatching at the tailboard and missing. He sat in the mud in the pouring rain with his chest heaving and the mules blowing and shaking, and Clara's crates sat dripping but whole in the wagon bed, and Luke laughed once, out loud. A sound that surprised him, a sound he hadn't made since before the empty stage. He was soaked and bruised, and one boot was full of brown water. And a town he'd meant to ride past in 2 days was counting on the boxes behind him, and he sat in the mud and laughed. Because for the first time in longer than he could rightly say, it mattered very much whether he made it home. Home. He noticed the word after he'd thought it. He let it stand. The flood ran itself out by dusk the way they do. And he crossed at dark on the settling water and pushed the tired mules on through the night. And it was the gray hour before dawn when he came down the long red rise above the basin and saw Hollow Springs again below him in the first light. He saw the people first, a knot of them down at the settlement well, standing wrong, standing the way folks stand around bad news. Then he saw why. The well mouth was torn open, the windlass he'd rigged smashed to flinders, and the fresh, clean cribbing he'd scrubbed by feel in the dark was fouled again. A barrel of something tipped down it in the night, the water gone milky and stinking. And on the door of Reuben Tate's store, where the whole town would pass it, a paper was nailed up, and Reuben was standing under it, gray-faced. and Clara was beside him with her hand pressed flat against the boards as if to hold the wall up. And as Luke brought the wagon down the rise, he could read the big block letters from 50 feet off. Pay Dostile by Sunday noon, or the spring is closed to Hollow Spring. They didn't waste the morning on the ruined well. There'd be time to dig it out a third time and a fourth. Luke had stopped expecting Doyle to quit. They hauled creek water and boiled it, and Clara tore into the dripping crates like a starved woman at a table. And by noon Hollow Springs had carbolic again, and quinine, and clean white lint instead of rags. And the smell of the sick rooms changed, and that was the first thing that changed. The boy was the second. Eli Coombs had been 3 days on the edge of it, neither down into the dark nor up out of it. And Asa had not slept in that whole time, but sat by the bed with his big sheep-heapman's hands useless in his lap. Clara dosed the boy, clean now, careful, watched the fever like a hawk watches grass. And on the second night after the freight came in, the thing turned. Luke was the one carrying the late water down when he saw it. He came to the Coombs door with his bucket and stopped on the sill. Clara had fallen asleep. She was on the dirt floor, with her back against the bed frame and her head tipped onto the straw tick, beside the boy, one cracked hand still laid open on his chest. Asleep the way the truly spent fall asleep, mid-thought, mid-watch. And the boy, Luke, set the bucket down soft and came close and looked, and the boy Eli was sleeping too. But it was a different sleeping. His face had color in it, a child's color, and the awful paper dryness was gone from his skin. And when Luke laid the back of his own cracked hand against the small forehead the way Clara had taught him, it was cool. Just cool. A boy's forehead, warm cool with ordinary sleep. Luke stood there a long moment in the lamplight and felt his throat do something it hadn't done at the empty stage, nor at his mother's bed, nor at any time he cared to count. Asa was asleep too, sitting up against the wall. Luke didn't wake any of them. He took his own coat off and laid it over Clara's shoulders, easing it so as not to wake her, and her head turned a little into the warmth of it, but she didn't rouse. And he sat himself down on the upturned bucket and kept the watch the rest of the night, so that the doctor could, for once, sleep. It was a strange peace, that watch. The lamp low and the crickets loud, and 3 people breathing easy in a room that a week back had smelled of dying. Luke sat with his elbows on his knees and watched the boy's chest rise and fall, and thought about a second room he'd sawed lumber for, 200 miles north, in a house standing empty with the lamp long burnt out, and he found the thought didn't cut the way it had. It just lay there, a thing that had happened, a road he'd been on that had brought him, by no way he'd have chosen, here, to this bucket, to this watch. To this, Clara woke before dawn. He felt her come awake, the change in her breathing, the small stillness as she took in the coat, and the cool boy, and the man sitting the watch on a bucket so she could rest. She didn't say anything for a while. When she did, her voice was low and rough with sleep. "He'll do now," she said. Once they turn like that, at his age, they come back fast. She drew the coat closer around her and didn't hand it back. "You should have woke me. You needed it worse than I did." She was quiet again. "Then, I have to tell you a thing, and I'd rather tell it now, in the dark, than have it sit unsaid between us getting heavier." She kept her eyes on the boy. "I see how it's going, with you and me. I'm not a fool, and I won't pretend I don't. And I won't pretend I don't feel the pull of it myself, because you've earned more than a lie." She turned her cup of cold coffee in her hands. "But I can't promise you anything, Luke Sands. I won't. There's a town past this one, with no doctor, and one past that, and that's the whole of my life, and I made my peace with it a long time ago at my brother's bed. I'm not a woman a man can wait at a road for. I'd be a worse cruelty to you than the one that came in the catalog, because she only cost you a stove. Do you hear what I'm telling you? I hear you. And? Luke looked at the sleeping boy a while before he answered. And I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I spent a spring asking a road to bring me a life. I'm done asking roads for things. He turned his hat in his hands. What I know is, 2 weeks back I'd have ridden past that wash and called myself sensible. And tonight, a boy's breathing easy that wasn't, and I had a hand in it, small as it was, and it's the first thing in a year I've done that I'd want my name put to. That's not yours to promise me. That's mine. I'm keeping it whether you ride out Tuesday or not. Clara looked at him for a long moment in the graying dark, and whatever she'd braced to argue, she let it go. She nodded once, slow. All right, she said softly. All right then. That was as far as either of them took it, and it was far enough, and the sun came up over the mesa and put a line of gold under the door, and Eli Coombs woke and asked, in a small cross voice, why his pa was sleeping, sitting up like a fool, and Asa Coombs came up out of his sleep with a sound and gathered the boy and held him and shook, and Luke went out into the new light to give the man his weeping in private. It was that morning with the town, breathing again, and the worst of the sickness broken behind them, that Reuben Tate called the people together in the store, and they had it out. What to do come Sunday? Some were for paying, scraping together what they could, anything to keep the water flowing. Some were for packing up and leaving the basin to Doyle and starting over somewhere, sick and broke as they were. The talk went around and got nowhere, frightened people in a small hot room. Luke stood at the back by the door and listened. A long while, and then he took the witnessed survey out from inside his shirt, the copy stamped and sealed at the Alder Land Office, and he unfolded it on Reuben's counter where the lamplight fell on it. His paper's a lie, Luke said into the quiet. That spring sits on a school section, government ground. No man can claim it, nor sell it, nor charge you a cent for the water on it. And there's a marshal coming with the true book to say so out loud. Doyle's been robbing you with a piece of paper that's worth no more than the nail it's hung on. You don't owe him a penny. You never did. He looked around the room, at Naomi, at Asa with the color back in his face, at Reuben. Sunday he's going to ride down here expecting a beat town to come pay him or run. I say we don't pay and we don't run. I say every soul in this basin walks up that draws Sunday morning and stands at that spring, and we let him try and move us off our own water in front of the law. The room was dead quiet. He's got guns, somebody said. He's got guns, Luke agreed. And we've got every man, woman, and child he spent 2 years bleeding standing in one place where the marshal can see it. A man can point a gun at one fellow. He can't point it at a whole town that won't be scared anymore. He folded the survey and put it back against his skin. Bring no guns of your own. Not one. We don't give him a fight to win. We give him a thing he can't shoot his way out of. People just standing. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then old Naomi Pike stood up off her stool, slow, her hard face set, and said, I've been hauling poison out of my own well in a bucket like my grandmother for a month. I'll stand, and sat back down, and that somehow was the thing that turned it. Sunday came clear and hot and windless. And in the first gray light, before the basin had its color, the dogs began to bark, and up along the rim of the draw above the spring, strung dark against. Luke walked up the draw alone, ahead of everybody. In the gray light, with his hands open and empty at his sides. That was the part he'd lain awake on. Somebody had to be first. And first was the one who'd catch it if catching was to be done, and he'd be cursed if he'd send Reuben Tate or some sheepman's widow up that draw ahead of him. So he went first. Up the green thread of the draw between the cottonwoods, past the smashed place where the settler's well had been poisoned. up toward the stone spring house, and the rail fence, and the dark line of riders along the rim. He stopped at the fence. He didn't touch it. He just stood at it, in plain sight, empty-handed, and waited, and let Doyle look at him. Doyle walked the gray down off the rim, easy, smiling the way he did everything. 3 men came down behind him and fanned out, rifles across their saddles, Cole among them. Doyle drew up on the far side of the fence and looked down at Luke, and the smile sat on his face like something painted there. "Just you?" Doyle said. "I'll be honest, friend, I expected either a payment or an empty town. I find I'm disappointed in both." "It's not just me," Luke said. He didn't say it loud. He didn't turn. But behind him, down the draw, the people of Hollow Springs had started up out of the cottonwood shadow. And they came on quiet, and they came on slow. And one by one they walked up the draw and stopped and stood at the fence at Luke's shoulder. Reuben Tate, his apron still on. Naomi Pike, her chin out. Asa Coombs with Eli's hand in his, the boy thin and pale but on his own 2 feet, the widow whose child had cried in the night. The whole basin, every soul that could walk, coming up out of the trees and ranging themselves along that fence in a line. None of them armed, all of them just standing, looking up at the man on the gray horse. Doyle's smile thinned. "This is foolishness," he said, and now the warmth was going out of his voice, and what was under it was coming through. "I hold this spring. I've got the paper filed at the county office, and I've got men, and you've got, what? A line of broke nesters and a sick child. Go home. Go home and bring me what's owed by noon, or so help me, I'll wall up that spring house and let the whole stinking basin dry up and blow away." "Show them the paper then," Luke said. "What? Your paper?" "The filing. You keep telling these folks you've got the law. Show it to them. Read it out." Luke took the witness survey from inside his shirt and held it up, unfolded, so the stamp and the seal showed. "Because I rode to Alder Gap, and I had the land office make me a true copy of the survey on this ground, witnessed and sealed, and it says this spring sits on a school section. Government land. Set aside, can't be filed on, can't be sold, can't be charged for by you nor any man. Your paper's a forgery, dressed up to scare folks too poor and too sick to ride to Alder and read the real book." He let that hang in the still morning. "So show them yours. Read it out loud, Doyle, in front of everybody. Or admit there's nothing on it worth the reading." For the first time, Vint Doyle had no smile at all. "Cole," he said, low, "clear the fence." Cole walked his horse up to the line, rifle held across him, and looked down at the wall of still faces, and for a moment nobody moved. And the whole thing balanced on the head of a pin. Cole's horse stamped, the rifle was right there. Luke kept his hands open, and his eyes on Cole's eyes, and did not give him one thing to shoot at. And beside Luke old Naomi Pike looked up at the mounted man and said, in a voice flat with 2 years of being afraid, "Go on then, ride me down. I've buried half this basin already. You'll have to do your murdering in front of all of us and in front of God. And then you'll have to live the rest of your days as the man that did it." Cole's horse danced sideways. Cole didn't ride anybody down. He looked back at Doyle. And his face had the look of a man doing arithmetic he didn't like the sum of. That was when Doyle made his mistake. He hauled his own pistol and fired it into the air. The shot cracked flat across the basin and rolled off the mesas, and a woman cried out, and a child started wailing. And for one terrible second, Luke thought the whole thing was going to come apart into the very thing he'd sworn to keep it from. People flinched. Nobody ran. The line bent and held. And into the ringing quiet after the shot came a new sound, from down the draw, behind them all, the slow, unhurried clop of a single horse, and a voice, old and dry and carrying, that said, "Now who," said Marshal Hollis, "fired that shot?" He came up the draw at a walk, badge bright on his coat, a sealed packet of papers in one hand, and the other resting easy on his pommel. In no hurry at all, an old man who had learned long ago that the slowest thing in any fight was usually the one in charge of it. He drew up at the fence, the lanes, and looked the whole scene over. The line of unarmed townfolk, Doyle with the smoke still curling from his pistol, the three riders with their guns half raised and now not knowing what to do with them. "Vint Doyle," the marshal said, conversational, "discharging a firearm at a gathering of unarmed citizens. That's a start." He lifted the sealed packet. "I've got here the land office record under the territorial seal. Care to guess what it says about your spring?" He didn't wait. "It says this is a school section. It says your filing was refused 2 years back, and you filed a forged copy at the county, anyhow. Which is a crime I can name about 4 ways before breakfast. You've been collecting money on water you've no more right to than the moon." He looked at the 3 riders almost kindly. "Now, you boys ride for a man whose paper just turned to smoke. You can keep sitting there with those rifles and find out how many years the territory gives for armed extortion. Or you can put 'em up and ride off, and I'll forget your faces. I'd think on it quick." Cole was the first to slide his rifle back in the boot, then the second man. The third looked at Doyle, and Doyle's face had gone the gray of his horse, and the third man read in it what they all read in it, that Vint Doyle was a bleeder, and the bleeding had just been made to cost more than he had. And he put his gun up too, and the 3 of them backed their horses and turned and rode up over the rim and were gone. And they did not look back, and they took nothing of Doyle's with but the lipum. Doyle sat alone on the gray with an empty pistol and a forged paper, and a whole town looking at him. "Get down off the horse, Vint," the marshal said, not unkindly. "It's done." And Vint Doyle, who had bled a basin dry with a piece of paper and never once had to use the gun on his hip, found that without the gun and the paper, he was only a soft hand in the paper, he was only a soft-handed man on a tall horse with nowhere left to point either one, and he got down. Hollis took the pistol from him and the forged filing from his coat, and he didn't put irons on him in front of the children. He just walked him down the draw to his own horse. And that was the whole of the violence. Done that Sunday morning, 1 shot fired into an empty sky. That hit nothing but Vint Doyle's last bluff. For a moment, nobody at the fence moved. They had braced so long and so hard for the worst that the not coming of it left them standing there hollow, not knowing what to do with their hands. Then Luke reached over and unhooked the rail of the fence Doyle had built and pulled it down and pushed open the gate of the spring house. And inside in the cool dark, the deep spring ran clear and cold and endless out of the living rock, the way it had run before any man had thought to put a price on it. He filled his cupped hands and drank the first sweet water that basin had drunk free in 2 years, and then he stood aside. And the people of Hollow Springs came through the gate, slow at first, and then not slow at all, with their buckets and their tin cups and their children, to drink. Naomi Pike filled a cup and didn't drink it. She carried it careful back down the line to where Clara Hale stood at the gate, who had stood at the back of it all this time the way the doctor always stood, where she could get to whoever fell. Naomi put the cup of clean cold water. She was 3 days packing, and Luke knew what each day's packing meant, and he didn't say anything about it, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be the asking he'd promised her he wouldn't do. The fever was past, the last 2 on their feet, weak and hungry and alive. The well dug out clean a final time, and the spring running free up the draw, and a marshal's seal on a paper that said it would run free for good. Word had gone up and down the basin, and folks Luke had never met rode in to look at the man who'd faced Doyle down with an empty pair of hands, and to look at the doctor who'd come to the wrong side of the river when nobody else would. The marshal had ridden out to Doyle's camp and brought back what the outfit had taken off folks over 2 years. Among it Luke's good bay, gaunt but sound, standing now in Naomi's corral as if it had never left. On the 4th morning, Clara's wagon stood loaded in front of Naomi's, the canvas mended, the medical chest lashed down, the mule team in the traces. There was a settlement up past Alder. She'd had word, with a bad summer coming on and no doctor closer than her. Luke checked the wheel he'd mended for her weeks back, in the wash, the day he'd told himself it was only 2 days. It was sound. He'd made sure of it. "You'll want to grease that near-side hub before Alder," he said. "I know how to grease a hub, Luke Sands." "I know you do." They stood there a moment by the wagon, with the whole basin's mourning going on around them. Smoke and birdsong, and somewhere a child's laugh that hadn't been there 3 weeks back. "The town's asked me to stay," Luke said. Clara went still. "Reuben and Naomi came to me last night. They want a man to keep the spring honest, now Doyle's gone, and keep the freight running fair, and," he stopped and made himself say the rest of it, "they want to raise a clinic. A real one, board walls, a stove, a clean room for the sick, a place a doctor could come back to and find ready instead of kneeling in the dirt." He looked at her. "I've got a wagon load of lumber I never used. Sawed it for a second room once. Figured it might as well be a room somebody'd have use of." For a moment, Clara Hale couldn't say anything at all, and that, from her, was a great deal. "You're staying," she said. "I'm staying." And then, because he wanted it clear between them, the way she'd made things clear in the dark by Eli's bed, "I'm not staying to wait at a road for you. I did enough waiting at roads to last me. I'm staying because for the first time since I can remember, there's a place that needs the things I'm good at and people in it I'd cross a flood for. And that's a life, Clara. That's the whole of a life. You gave me that, not by promising me a thing, but by letting me watch you not need to be promised anything to do good in the world." He turned his hat in his hands. "You go on and ride your circuit. I'll be building. And every town you doctor between here and the end of it, you'll have one place on the whole road where the room's already clean and the coffee's already on, and somebody's glad clear through to see your dust come over the rise." Clara looked at him a long moment, and her eyes were bright, and she let him see it, and him see it, which was its own kind of gift from a woman who'd spent her life not letting people see her tired. She reached into her dress and brought out a watch, an old worn silver pocket watch. The case rubbed smooth, and she put it in his hand and closed his cracked fingers over it the way she'd shown him to close a sick man's hand around a cup. "That was my brother's," she said. "It's the only thing of his I kept. I've carried it on every road for 20 years to remind me why I ride." She held his hand closed over it. "I want it to sit in a clean clinic in a town that doesn't have to bury its children over a barrel of water. I want it somewhere, for once, that I built something that stays. You keep it wound. I'll know it's running when I'm not here." "Clara, don't." She smiled and let go his hand. "Don't make it the asking. You did so well not asking. Don't spoil it now." So he didn't. She climbed up to the wagon seat and gathered the lines, and the whole of Hollow Springs came out to see her off, Naomi and Reuben and Asa with Eli on his shoulders, the boy waving both arms. And Clara Hale lifted a hand to the lot of them and clucked to the mules and rolled out of the basin up the long red rise toward Alder, and whatever waited past it. And Luke Sands stood in the road and watched her go. But he didn't watch her the way he'd once stood, watching an empty stage road, hollowed out, a man with his hat in his hand waiting for his life to be brought to him by somebody else. He watched her the way you watch a friend off on a good road, with the silver watch warm in his fist and a wagon load of lumber behind him, and a clinic to raise before the next bad summer, And when her dust had gone over the rise, he didn't stand there 1 minute longer. By the time the cottonwoods went gold along the draw, the clinic stood finished. Board walls, a tight roof, a good cook stove, a clean back room with a real bed in it for whoever the next bad season brought down. The lumber he'd sawed for a wife he never met had become a room a whole basin would have use of. The spring ran clear and free up the draw, and the well drank sweet, and Eli Coombs chased a yellow dog up the lane in the long evening light, hollering, no paper color left in his face at all. Luke sat on the clinic step in the dusk with a tin cup of coffee cooling beside him and the old silver watch ticking in his vest. And he watched the road. He'd built the habit of watching the road. But it was a different watching now. A wagon came over the long red rise. As the light went amber, a canvas-topped wagon he'd have known at twice the distance, rolling down easy into the basin on its circuit, coming back the way she'd said it would. Luke set down his coffee and stood and went out to the road to meet it.